All right, everybody. And so here I am with the lovely Patricia Zurita Ona, which is I'm gonna have you. I'm gonna have you introduce yourself in a moment. But I just love the Zurita. I just love the way that you're talking. It's just very. I love it. And so everybody, welcome here. If you are here with us live, please send hearts. Let us know where you're watching this from. And even if you're watching the replay, let us know where you're from so that we can connect with you. This, my friend, is Cocktails and Courageous Conversation. This is just two women getting together in a bar, I think you're having a glass of water, aren't you? or a bottle of water.
That's right.
And I am tonight having freshly pressed apple juice. I just found how lovely that is. So I was just telling Dr. Zurita that it's Monday night and I'm pretty tired, and I'm pretty sure that if I had a cocktail now, I would be asleep within the hour. So just know, cocktails are optional. Courage is guaranteed. My name is Rikke. I'm a psychologist and I teach, implement, act in Scandinavia and all over the world. And today I have the pleasure of having Dr. C joining me. And I've been looking forward to this, and I'm gonna have you introduce yourself. And I am so looking forward to connecting with you and offering you an opportunity to tell us about you, your work, the books that you've written, and also the people who are watching, I know, will love if you could give us some like tips and tricks. And so many of the people who will be watching us tonight, Patricia, are practitioners, and what we love is when someone tells us a little bit like what can we like give us some tips of what we can do. But before we get to that, tell us a little bit about yourself, Dr. C. Can I just say, I found out your website is called thisisdrc.com. Is that correct? That's your website? Thisisdrc.com. I
Got
love
it.
that.
You
I
got it.
love that. I just think that's so cool. All right, my dear, tell us about yourself. Tell us about yourself.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I am a big fan of what you're working on and what you're creating and that community you're building. And it's an honor. I'm very happy to be doing this with you. So thank you for making this space. And as you were saying, my heart goes to you too. I take it and I give you back. um, I am originally from Bolivia, South America, as you can hear my accent. And I had one, and I was so basically these days I live in the Bay Area. I run a small therapy coaching practice specialized on acceptance and commitment therapy, of course, and apply for fear-based struggles. And when I think of fear-based struggles, I am thinking about many conditions such as perfectionism, procrastination, obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety performance, social anxiety. I think behind all of these struggles, there is this really difficulty navigating effectively and compassionately when we are feeling scared. So over the years, that's what I have been doing, looking at how ACT can be helpful for anyone that gets stuck with fear-based reactions. And I have written a couple of books about that. And what else? I think that's basically what I do, and I'm trying to do more online things. It's a new endeavor for me. I believe that the way that we can disseminate ACT skills all over the world has significantly changed because of internet. So I am learning how to do things online these days, of course.
And so tell me, I just wanted to say we have David Kliba is here from Sweden, and I see that there's a lot of Swedish
Hello.
people here. Hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining us. And so,
Hell,
Patricia,
yes.
like, what makes your heart sing? Like, what are you passionate about? I know that is a big question. I understand.
You know, I but I got a sense you were going to ask that. I love it. I love the question. Um, I think one of the things that I have experienced in my life is how fear can shape who we are in the world, how we can be as human beings, how we connect with the people we love. And fundamentally, I think that fear can shrink our life and can narrow our perspective. And I am super passionate about skills. They can be who they want to be. And I know that may sound a little bit like a cliche, but I think that I know directly, and I have seen this with my clients that I work with, that once they learn to relate to their minds in a more compassionate way, when they learn to make room for all the fear-based experience they may have, and they can start taking actions towards the stuff that matters to them, with their significant others, in their relationship with themselves, in their careers, it's incredible the shift that you see people making. It's like they go from surviving to thriving. And it's not perfect, it's not easy peasy, but it's really humbling for me to witness that and to guide that process sometimes and to navigate to that dance of accepting fear and doing something that matters. So that's something that really, really speaks to my heart.
Oh, I love that. Accepting fear. I love that you call this a dance, like dancing with the fear, allowing the fear to be there and doing what matters. And so, Patricia, like, I'm gonna get soon to the part where you are the professional and teaching all of us. And I wanted to ask you, since we are now hanging out in a bar, you and me, have you known fear, like, well, of course, I'm guessing you have, but in what ways have you known fear in your life?
Oh, that. And I think my whole life I have traveled with a collection of fears. No one fear, but many of them, of all sizes, shapes, and colors. When I was born in Bolivia, I was born in the midst of a dictatorship. And my country, Bolivia, had three dictators as presidents at three different times. And even though I didn't witness firsthand, I did experience what means to be in a culture of fear, in which what you say needs to be carefully thought, in which after 8 p.m. you cannot be walking on the streets, otherwise you could be deported. So I think that fear is something that can shape all of us as a group, and I did experience that. Also, I grew up in a society that, while it was very, very compassionate, very understanding, gender-based roles were also very defined, and it's like a women's life was defined because of the gender. So you also witness that, how women as a group, sometimes they have to be careful with what they do, or how they live their lives, or whether they get divorced or not. So I think with time, I was afraid of making poor financial decisions. I was afraid of choosing the wrong partner. I was afraid of being a failure. And I really, really mean it when I say that I have traveled with a collection of fears. If I can do a map of all the fears that I had in my life, oh my goodness, we are not going to end. I can tell you that. I think it's part of our experience, but also there are many times in which I know what it feels to be stuck by fear. I know what it feels to be stuck with this fear of being a failure and not making it. And of course, as an immigrant, as a person with accent, as a person that speaks with her hands, and giggles sometimes, when I came to the States, I developed other types of fears. I was afraid of the way that I talk. I was afraid of not making it as an immigrant. And I was afraid of, again, choosing the wrong partner. So I think my fears have been shifting to different times in my life. And I do think that for act, I know how to handle them, kind of. But everything shifted for me when I really dive into acting skills. That's when the shift starts happening. That's when I start really learning to dance with my own fears, with my own struggles, with my own stories of not being good enough. And I think that later on, who knows what my mind is going to tell me in terms of my fears, right? Who knows what my mind is going to get hooked on at times. But I think that, yeah, to your question is that I absolutely know firsthand how it feels to be living in a group that is shaped by fear, in a collective level, in a family that behaves shaped by fear, and in an individual level, how I was stuck many times in my life because of fear.
Wow. I love that, like the way you're describing it as a collection of fears that resonates so well with me. And I just want to thank you for sharing this with us, and also acknowledge that I find it so. I recognize it, and I find it so humbling as well that you're telling me on one hand that you are experiencing like this fear of not being good enough. And I just want to acknowledge the fact that you have written what, 6 books?
Yes.
What is that
Yes,
like
six.
for you? Because like I published my first book last year, and I found it to be so vulnerable. It's like I found it to be. I still find it to be very difficult to share with the world something that you wrote, and people will think that maybe you're not smart enough, and they will find out that you're a fraud and all of that. What was that like for you? What has that been like for you? On one hand, maybe not, maybe fearing that you're not good enough, and then pouring your heart into your work and into words in 6 books. What was that like for you?
Yeah. Before I answer, I just want to say that I can't wait for your book to be in English. I can't wait for it to be in English. That will be amazing.
Thank
I'm
you.
crossing fingers and toes that it happens. and
Thank you.
and my sincere appreciation for putting my appreciation for putting your work out there. I know it's not easy, but I'm so glad you're doing that. I'm so glad you
Thank
did it.
you. Right back at
Um,
you.
Thank you. So if I can share a story a little bit about my
Yes.
relationship with writing, maybe around 2004, I was invited to go out for a book. And I remembered having a mentor at the time, and he said, I would like to invite you to participate with me on this book. And my eyes got watery. I start crying and crying, and I say, I would love to, but I don't think I'm ready. And my mentor said, I think you are. I say, I can't. It's English. It's not my first language. But you hear how I talk? And I kept crying. I was very touched by the invitation, but my fear was very loud. My mind told me that I wasn't ready. And then I wrestled with that fear. I navigate with it. I explore what was really hurting about it, what's behind my own fear. And after maybe 25, 30 days, I went to my mentor's office and I said, I'm ready. Let's do it. Um, and and when I say that I was ready to take that project, it's not that I wasn't afraid. Of course, I was afraid. I was afraid of not writing well enough. I was afraid of not sounding smart enough. People what was important, which is disseminate active skills, because I fundamentally believe on them and how impactful they can be. So that was the first time, and then every time I'm reading something, I sit and then the voices start coming. Oh my gosh, that doesn't make sense. That's a poor metaphor. No one is going to read that book. Your career is going to be over. And in moments like that, I practice active skills. I say, okay, here is my mind talking. I think I need to clear my mind. Sometimes I visualize my fears like little ghosts, and I imagine that they're like this little ghost on my shoulder. And I keep typing and writing. And And I think when I'm writing, I love the process, but it's not fear free. And there is always what you were describing, Rikke, this sense of vulnerability, because you cannot do act without putting yourself out there. I think that, it's not just a technique, it's really how we experience all types of things in our life. So we do share part of our lives in the context of our writing, sometimes in the context of doing these talks or workshops. So there is the fear of being misjudged, misunderstood. It's always there. It's always there. But in my heart, I know that once we have a flavor of art skills and what acceptance can do in our life and what acceptance can do with the stories that our mind tells us, it's incredible when we really tap into what matters. So I think I also experience that when I get feedback from people about, the skills in the books or what is for them. But it comes with everything. Writing, for me, as much as I love it, it comes with a fears. It comes with, I have to fire my mind right now. It comes with excitement. It comes with all types of, I think, internal experiences. But overall, I have to say that it's really a big values-based move for me. It's something that truly, truly, truly matters to do.
And I think
it's not pain-free or fear-free, of course.
And I love that you're saying this, because I think you're totally nailing it. Like, fear shows up in our lives, and in sometimes as an entire collection. And what I love is that that when we practice what we preach, that when practitioners actually do the work that we're teaching others. And so what I hear you say is that you're writing with fear and from a place of values. And I think that is just again want to acknowledge that, and it's very inspiring. And so what would you like, so when your clients come to your clinic and to work with you, what are some of the strategies and techniques that you are so many of the people here know ACT, but it's we all present it in different ways. So what are your favorite techniques, tools for working with people who are struck by fear and avoiding?
That's a great question. And so I think something to perhaps is helpful to clarify is that when people come to see us, and I'm sure this narrative happening, or I'm dealing with OCD, or I'm dealing with phobia, or I'm dealing with procrastination or perfectionist, I think there is a lot of narratives because everyone is trying to make sense of their own pain. But for me, many times, it's trying to understand what are these responses to fear trying to protect people from. Fundamentally, fear can be very, very adaptive, but it's also pushing all of us to do something. And sometimes we develop chronic patterns of avoidance, right? And to me, I think I'm trying to make sense of what is this fear-based response protecting this person from. In some way, the technical thing will be to do a functional assessment. But if I put the technical term on the side, I think we're really to understand what is the function of fear in this person's life, in their context, in a given moment, and what are they protected from. Is it a narrative? Is it feel like they are a failure? Is this fear about being a failure in the future? It's about fears of intimacy. Is fears about not being the parents they want to be. So that's something for me important, that it's going beyond a little bit these outside narratives, and trying to hear with ACT ears and to also see with ACT eyes, right? What's behind, what's the process? What is this person trying to protect him, or themselves from? So I think that has been very impactful in the work I do. That will be one thing, right? Trying to understand more what's behind the fear, how it happens in a given context, what's a function of fear. And again, the technical term, as we know, it's functional analysis, right? Let's really unpack this a little bit. That will be one thing that I will start with.
And I just wanted to say that I love that you're talking about like, sometimes I get geeky about the words here, but I think for most of us, fear has the function of no, 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 like avoidance, avoidance, avoidance. And I think like as soon as you say, how is this trying to protect you? It has this like the word in and of itself, or it has this function of caring for, and so I think that by using that with clients, like your fear, what is it trying to protect you from? Using that word in and of itself, will probably transform a little bit the experience of fear because it now gets a broader function. I just wanted to acknowledge that. I really love that question. What is your fear right now trying to protect you from? Yes.
That's true. I think if, let's say that I go to see you and I say, I am afraid of, I don't know, taking the elevator. And you may want to ask me, is that fear, what happens if you take the elevator? What is that fear trying to protect you from? And I may say, I may have a panic attack.
Yeah.
And then we can unpack a little bit more. And if you have a panic attack, in which way that's impacting your life? What's getting in your way there? So I think what is key here is to go beyond a little bit, understand more like the context and what's behind, what's the process behind. And I think ACT does a beautiful job with that, right? I think, to me, it's about training our ears and our eyes with an ACT frame, right? And go beyond and trying to understand what people are wrestling with, how it happens, and what they are protecting themselves from.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And so I'm just going to look down and monitor the comments here, because I wanted to tell people, I see Venus is here, Anna is here, Anka is here, Suzanne is here, nice. Isabella. Thank you guys for being here with us. It's lovely to see you. Patrick is here. And so, and if you have any questions for Dr. Zurita, just put them in the comments here. I'll make sure to monitor it. And so, like, do you have any favorite, I get this question all the time, like what my favorite metaphor and exercise is. And I struggle to answer that question because I have, using your words, a collection. But, so I won't ask you if you have one, because that would, but could you tell us about some of the metaphors or exercises that you like to use in your practice?
That's a very juicy and a spicy question, as I would say. It's juicy and spicy because there are so many, and at the same time, I think it's helpful to always remember that within ACT, we do have a lot of experiential exercises and techniques and interventions, but also creating a frame to deliver them is ultra, super, duper important. I think creating the context to facilitate the metaphors and experiential exercises makes a huge difference. Otherwise, sometimes the sessions can become just a matter of an exercise, right? You can throw monsters in the bus, right? Like really quickly without having created a context of, okay, without facilitating openness to the experience versus attachment to a control agenda. So I think that's important. It's important to create a context before doing the intervention. There are many things that I do in my practice. My practice, again, is specialized on fear-based struggles. So we do values-based exposures, up and down, left and right, 24/7. We're constantly facilitating values-based exposures for people to get in touch with all the internal stuff showing up and that drives ineffective and unworkable behaviors. The way in which ACT facilitates exposure, and again, I don't have the truth with capital T about this, right? But the way that I do it is by slowing a little bit, helping a person to get in touch with that fear stimuli. For example, if you are afraid of contamination, or if you're afraid of taking an elevator, instead of just going and doing it and powering through it, right? We slow down a lot of the process. I may ask questions like, what is your mind telling you right now? What's showing up for you? Can we briefly scan in your body? Can you start from the top of your head and slowly move through your shoulders and your neck and your stomach? Any sensation showing up? What's happening with this sensation? Is it moving? Is it static? What else is your mind telling you? So I think that's one of the things that has been fundamental in the work I do. But that will be, I will encourage people, if they are facilitating values-based exposures, in addition to creating the context, that it's all about being curious and open to the experience, when facilitating the values-based exposure, it's helpful to slow down a little bit the process. Otherwise, people may go to white knuckling and say, I'm just doing it. Yeah. But our task is to help people to get in touch with what's happening inside, under their skin. So one way to do that is by prompting. What's showing up again? What's your mind telling you? And what do you feel like doing? And what happens if you do that? What happens if you keep avoiding touching the doorknob? What happens if you keep avoiding touching the elevator? So those questions about prompting, about act processes, are going to be helpful in terms of checking and really helping the person to get in contact with what is really aversive under their skin. I know that sometimes that can be hard to do because clients are in so much pain and they want to have sometimes quick fixes. But because of that, I think it's important to create a frame of why are we doing this? What is this exposure in the service of? And then when doing the exposure, facilitate more prompts, really slowing down a little bit. So that will be something that will encourage people to consider in their work. That's something that we do a lot. And as you know, exposure-based interventions are already built in within ACT. If you are facilitating ACT, you are facilitating exposure. It just happens that we also need to do targeted exposures to a specific aversive stimuli sometimes.
I just want to, I love what you're saying, and I just wanted to kind of break it down for us so that the points that I'm hearing you're saying is one of the first one, and I think it's so wise, is that to create a context for the experiential stuff, for the exercise or the metaphor. And I just wanted to agree with you because I see sometimes practitioners kind of throwing in an exercise without knowing like why they're doing it or how they're doing it or like the function of what they're doing. And so that can create confusion kind of, for everybody and might serve, as you said earlier, as a control strategy. So I just wanted to emphasize that point that you were saying, like by creating a context for the metaphor, for the exercise, for the experiential work. And then I hear you say also that it's so important, like the exposure stuff, that exposure is not about just enduring and with white knuckles taking the elevator or looking in the eyes of the spider or whatever. It is all about expanding your attentional repertoire, and with you and me, therapists, evoking responses where we're inviting people to check in. What is going on in your body? What can you notice right now? And I feel what you're saying is just so important. I just wanted to pause and emphasize that that exposure is not about enduring. It's about contacting an aversive stimuli repeatedly and expanding your repertoire into contact with that. And then one other thing that I think you said, like I just heard you say that was so important, is that you are asking people, why are we doing this? Like you are pairing this with values. And I just wanted to once again emphasize that. I love that you were saying that. The context I am in, I work in Scandinavia, a lot in Denmark and a lot in Sweden, and I find that particularly in Denmark, behaviorism is kind of like if this was a language, it's a language that very few people speak. So I just wanted to. It sounds like you are like fluent in behaviorism. And some of the people who are watching that, some of my, Danish, some of our Danish colleagues, this might be a little different to what we're used to, because again, behaviorism is not that typical in Denmark. So thank you for shining a light on that. And so, keep going. I think I interrupted you.
I didn't know. Oh. No. It's actually helpful. Thank you for just capturing a little bit, the keys of this conversation. So something that I want to go back to what you say, Rikke. I think the context of change is fundamental. I think because what happens with a lot of my clients, and I know this in my personal life, how control agenda, how attached I was to feeling less anxious enough. Our clients come to see us with the same agenda. Yes. So for me, sometimes before doing any type of values-based exposure, I am looking at how my clients are relating to their mind. In one of my books, I talk about developing a new dating relationship with your mind, in which you are not infatuated with your mind and with thinking, right? You actually approach this new dating relationship with your mind, noticing all the rules that your mind has about thinking and about behaving. In the case of OCD, for example, in the case of obsessive compulsive disorder, there are many strong beliefs. They are basically rules, right, that are driving rule govern behaviors. For example, because I think so, it makes me so. If I think that I am a murderer, that means I'm a murderer. Or because I think a lot about this means it's important. And what happens, at least in my experience, is that if you go into exposures too quickly, all that noise from the mind, all those rules are going to flare up. So before doing any of exposure, I check the values. We do a lot of values work, but then I'm looking how fused my client is, how attached are we to these rules, and if they are very hooked in rules, they're holding them as the absolute truth, then to me that is a cue that we have. And micro diffusion skills, I invite them to do really small things like, for 1 minute, let's watch what the mind says. Just to start building the muscle to notice that the mind has a life on its own. And then I invite them to notice any of the thoughts that are popping up. So we do all this before doing any exposure. Because as we know, it is natural that all of us will get easily hooked into these rules, or trying to feel less discomfort, or trying to be less afraid. And all of that, what's going to happen, going to affect the quality of the exposure or the experience. So I think that is also different, right? That sometimes you have to check, I think, the willingness of a client to face fears, but you also have to check how they are relating to thinking in general, at least for me. And those are important variables before doing any values-based exposure work, which is absolutely needed. But also, if we don't create a context of change, the values-based exposures can become another form of exercising control of the experience. Clients sometimes can be doing exposures like 100 times because they are hooked into a different goal. They want to feel less. They want to be less anxious. So I think the context of change is key for the work that we're doing.
Oh, I agree. And I think it's like, I love the way you're talking about it as muscles, like that before you dive into exposure part, you want to check in how people relate and how the willingness muscle, is that toned, or does it need to be strengthened a bit before the diffusion muscle, etc. I love the way that you're speaking about this, Patricia. It makes such great sense. Really, really.
I hope it's helpful. And
it is helpful. It is helpful. What kind of clients
Notice my
are,
mind. Notice my mind coming with some thoughts.
yes. What is your mind telling you right now?
My mind was telling me, of course, that's what the mind does, right? My mind was telling me, is it helpful? I hope it's helpful, right? There's this sound, yeah, there's like the soundtrack, right? That's
Yes.
what the mind does, right?
Yes.
That's what the mind does.
And I like the way you're talking about it as a soundtrack. Sometimes, like my mind is going like the greatest hits of why Ricky is not good enough. And so I think it's so helpful to talk about it like that, like a soundtrack or greatest hits of something. Yes. Let's hear with the people who are watching. Can you just put in the comments if you find this to be helpful, if you have any questions? We'd like to feel that we're connecting with you guys who are with us right now. Tell us in the comments, is this helpful? Let's just see here. And so while I'm also monitoring the comments here, Patricia,
Thank
what
you.
what kind of clients do you mostly work with? Do you have like, so I'm noticing in my practice, I work with
Hmm.
mainly practitioners, like I'm teaching most of the time, and
Yeah.
I work with female empowerment a lot. Like here's one saying, it's
Hmm.
Roxana's with us saying it's very helpful. What kind of clients are you like,
Thank you.
what do you work with the most?
Yeah, yeah. Um, I primarily work with any person dealing with perfectionism, with obsessive compulsive disorder, with procrastination, with phobias, with anxiety performance, anything related to fear, including fear of intimacy, in which love has become aversive for some people.
Yes.
So I also work with that. And if I can say, you asked this before, another important, I think, exercise that I do with my clients along the lines of what you and I were talking. My mind telling me, is that helpful? Are you saying something helpful? And our mind telling us that we're not good enough. So one of the things that I do with my clients, and I will invite everyone listening to us to also try it on your own and see how it goes for you. It's really having a piece of paper and drawing a line. It's like your lifeline. And just think about I'm going to pause. I'm going to do it actually right now so we can do it together.
We'll do it with you.
If we can, it just really can be any piece of paper, just lovely. Just drawing a line in the middle of it. And for a second, imagine that is your lifeline. And see if you can go back to the time when you were a kid. And is there any story your mind was telling you about who you were at that time when you were a kid? It doesn't have to be the perfect story, but do you recall any narrative your mind told you about yourself when you were a kid? And just write it down. You can make a little mark as I'm doing, like this is mine and I'm doing here. So just can write it down. And as you're writing it down, just notice how it feels to put that on the paper, to put those words on the paper. And if it's okay, let's move to the time when you were a teenager and think about your adolescence. And again, what did your mind tell you about who you were? Did your mind tell you any narrative that was hard to sit, painful to watch, was painful to watch? And notice how it is to put that on the paper. Notice any sensation maybe showing up. And with gentleness, just make room for that feeling or that sensation without forcing anything. And if it's okay, you go a little bit farther and think about the times in your life in which you were a young adult. Maybe you were 20 or 21 years old. What did your mind tell you about who you are that was hard to sit with? let's notice again how it feels to put those letters on that piece of paper. And I'm going to pause now because of the time constraints, but Rikke, thank you for joining me in this very short exercise. And do you mind, if you feel comfortable, of course, do you mind sharing how was for you to do this and anything that came up?
Oh, this was really interesting, and really it's very painful actually, to see. And the interesting thing is that I kind of wrote the same thing as a child, as a teen, and as a young adult. I added a one more word as a young adult, but the story is the same. And it's kind of sad to look at it and notice it. And there's also a piece of compassion when, like, when I look at the words and I see and I also see this little girl with this story, and there's a compassionate part, but definitely it's very vulnerable, very sad.
Well, thank you again for joining me, and I appreciate that you did this with me. And if it's okay, just to clarify, when I'm working sometimes with clients who are high achievers, who are doers, go-getters, and they're dealing with perfectionistic actions, one of the things that happens is that all of that is driven by these stories that were not good enough. And one of the exercises that we do is a little bit of what we did together in a very brief format. And I do apologize because usually that takes me a little bit longer, but we do map all the stories their mind told them. A kid, teenage, mid-20s, mid-30s, and you can keep going on. The second part of that exercise is to ask them what they did to manage the story. And they also write down a piece of paper. And this is something to notice how no human, through our life, our mind is coming up with all these narratives, sometimes the same, sometimes a different one. And to see all the things that we have done so hard to manage the story. So this is very, very, very impactful because these narratives don't come from one day to another day. And of course, when you're facilitating these exercises, you can slow down much more than what I did and just checking what happens and tell me more about that. Sometimes I invite my clients to bring into their mind a moment in which they were stuck and they were criticizing themselves. And then they hold that memory to answer the question, what did your mind tell you about who you are? So you can also do that. But the exercise is to reflect on all our efforts to manage those stories and the variation of those stories. And then we look at, all the strategies people have done. In the case of perfectionists, working more, pushing harder, avoiding things I'm not good enough at, trying, spending hours doing a lot of research so I can make the perfect decision. But when we map this, it can be really impactful to see how hard we have been working to manage the stories that were not good enough.
Yeah.
And then, as you were saying, you share this, Rikke, beautifully, then we can add more self-compassion to the part of us that works really hard to protect ourselves from those stories. But I think this exercise opens up a little bit a very rich conversation. Very rich conversation. And you can take a little bit of extra time, of course, to do so. But as you can see, it's also very, I think, very reflective. There is a lot of acceptance coming up when we're doing this. We're slowing down the process and we're really mapping our control agenda a little bit.
Wow. And I think there's something powerful as I look at my piece of paper. So my story, which is kind of the same, is that I'm too much and that I'm too difficult. And then as I come into young adult, there's also the story of being uninvited. And so when I look at this now, there's also this interesting piece that like looking at it, there's kind of the diffusion in and of itself, isn't there? Like watching it, and the perspective part as just, stepping outside of the story and watching the story unfold on paper. I'm finding this very powerful as I do it right now. What's your story, Patricia? Would you be willing to share?
It is. Yes, absolutely. And thank you for asking. When I was a kid, I thought of myself as a weird kid. I thought I was a weird kid, and I was. I think I was, and the way that I managed the story was by making sure I didn't say anything that will sound weird or that even play in a weird way. So that was something that my mind told me as a kid. And then as a teenager, my mind told me that I wasn't cute enough. I used to compare myself to the girls in my peer group and say, oh my goodness, they are so cute, but I'm not so cute as they are. And I look at my body in a way because of the story. And then in my early 20s, my mind told me that I wasn't smart. That I wasn't smart enough. And the way that I managed the story was by trying to say things in a very professional way, right, with technical stuff. But I was really managing the story of not being smart. And Rikke, I think, and I do this exercise sometimes about different things, right? I like to do some mapping, right? Because it does, one of the things that could happen, it may not be for everyone, is that there is perspective. It's like you're looking again at those thoughts, at those letters. And I have to say that in some way, perhaps because we're living out the skills, it softens up the story. The story. The pain is there, right? It's hard sometimes to look at those stories or those memories. But there is something about looking at it versus looking at ourselves from it.
Exactly.
So I think this tiny exercise can be really powerful.
I really hope that people who are with us now, that they will give themselves the opportunity to take a short pause, either now or later, and actually do this. I found this very powerful, really powerful to map it out. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Patricia. Wow.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I think when we think about these fears of failure, most people may go into perfectionistic behaviors, high achieving behaviors, or procrastinating behaviors too. So I think having ways to tap into what they're really working on, the process, which is this high attachment to these narratives, this high attachment to rules about how things are supposed to be in the world, and to map all the unworkable behaviors. I think that's one way we can start getting out of the level to go into the process.
Yeah. And as I hear you speak, Patricia, it sounds like you're also coming, well, obviously, as you are doing ACT, but I just wanted to emphasize or to amplify this, that it sounds like you speak from a very compassionate place, like your being, like the way your entire being, for me, like oozes of compassion. And so, and could you tell us a little bit about, like, how do you work with that part as a practitioner? How do you foster compassion when you do your work, when you do your magic?
You're so you're so kind. You're so kind. And I will answer that question. I also want to say I am sorry for the background noise. If people are listening to us, there is construction happening in the building. So my apologies about that.
We have compassion for that as well.
Of what I don't have control of.
Exactly.
Thank you. It's much needed. Thank you. I have to say that for the years I had become really, really self-compassion about looking at how we relate to ourselves. Do we talk to ourselves with a harsh voice and critical and naggy voice? Do we hold our struggles with kindness? There are many ways in which I think that's embedded in my work. But I think in the context of there are so many ways in which I practice this. So a general way will be if I start feeling, or if my clients start feeling scared, or they are afraid of having a panic attack, or they are afraid of being a failure, or they are overly concerned about making mistakes, I invite them to pause a little bit, to notice what's that fear about, what are you trying to protect yourself? And then I invite them to coach themselves any form of caring, but that acknowledges that they are suffering, that this is hard, like this is hard for me right now, or I am doing the best I can. This is challenging right now. So sometimes people think that within ACT, we don't encourage clients to practice self-talk, but everyone is doing self-talk all the time, right? So I think just something to clarify that we can, within ACT, we also encourage clients to practice that as a way to handle those moments of stuckness. So to me, what I do a lot is guiding my clients to acknowledge that they are suffering, that this is hard, they are getting stuck. And they can use any word that they want. If people want to use more physicalizing things, like placing your hand on your chest, or sometimes putting both of your hands on your chest. But it's really acknowledging that this moment is hard. Yeah. This is really, really hard for me. And that's one way. When I am doing values-based exposures work, it's embedded as part of the exposure that at the end we're going to be asking, okay, how, what you just did facing that fear is so hard. How are we going to appreciate that hard work you just did? How are we going to hold that with kindness? What's a caring thing you can do in this moment? There's many practices of self-compassion that they are beautifully done. We can go into minutes a day to practice self-compassion. But to me, if you ask me, the biggest thing I encourage my clients, and I'm very invested into this, and how we can practice self-compassion on the go. Yeah. As I move throughout my day, bad things happening to me. As in this moment when I'm talking to you and I hear the drill going on in the background, how can I be kind with myself about something that I don't have control of? But it's hard, right? Because my mind may quickly say, Patricia, you should have done better. You should have talked to the construction workers. Sometimes our minds may go into this critical mode. But the biggest thing that we face is how can we practice kindness and gentleness as we move through our day and navigate all these things that could go wrong, or mistakes that we have at times. So acknowledging that the struggle is important. One of the challenges that I encounter is that for some people, sometimes practice self-compassion, it is aversive. Yeah. It's aversive, and they will say things like, I don't deserve to be gentle, or if I'm kind with myself, that's getting me off the hook, right? And I don't know how you navigate those blocks to self-compassion. But I just clarify that being kind with ourselves doesn't mean that we're not accountable with what we have done or what we have said. But it means that we acknowledge that we are humans, and as humans, we have imperfect moments. And that self-compassion also gives us a chance to acknowledge that, yes, I made an error here, and what can I do the next time? So that's something to clarify, right? So I sometimes, work with that with my clients. And this other narrative that says, I don't deserve to be compassionate, kind with myself. I look at the workability of the ongoing criticizing of themselves. What happens if you keep berating to your mind? how does your life get like this, or does your life get like this, and how do you relate to yourself? Has that ever worked for you? So those are some two blocks that I encountered. And the other one that I encountered in the Bay Area is that tough love is motivating. Right? I have to be tough with myself. I have to, be a little bit harsh with myself so I can get things done. If I am a little bit soft or gentle, I'm not going to get things done. And I distinguish then that the self-compassion is not about being this soft person that is like okay with everything and you are like practicing all every single time. That there is a difference between motivating yourself and encouraging yourself versus being brutally harsh with yourself. And what happens when we do that? So I think sorry, that was a long response, but I think it's making room to acknowledge that we are suffering in this moment. And then if there are, I think, sometimes blocks to self-compassion that we have to unpack with our clients and with ourselves many times.
I love the way you are making self-compassion very practical and having people practice this on the go. And I agree, like we could do all these exercises and people are doing them. And I think it's so important to practice right now. What is happening? Can I have compassion for that? Even in the moments where compassion is evoking this, like, oh, I'm not worthy, or I'm self-centered. Having compassion for that as well.
Yes.
I love that. Compassion on the go.
That's true. That's true.
I love that. I think it's so important.
One of the feedbacks,
Go on.
If I can add a little bit, and I'm sorry, that connection is a little bit tricky here. But I think that one of the feedbacks that I got from my clients a lot is that I don't have the time. And think about people who are raising children. They are driving all over, up and down. There is all this commitment. It's like we're living in the culture hustle as much as we try to slow down, right? There is a lot happening around us. There is our to-do list keep growing.
Yes.
So I think the biggest thing that my clients have asked is, how can I practice that as I move to different activities? So I think these tiny things can be extremely impactful for people. So they don't get stuck in hours of rumination or criticizing or being tough with themselves, right? So having a 3-day meditation retreat, it's a beautiful thing, and I hope we all can do it, and I wish that for my clients as well. But also is how do they navigate in their lives hour by hour? That's to me, I think, important too.
And very practical, very, very practical and very doable. And so we're just about to wrap it up here. And I'm going to ask you in a moment to stay in the bar so that we can say our goodbyes. But before we go off air, Patricia, so people can find you at www.thisisdrc.com. You have a podcast as well. What is the name of your podcast?
Thank you. And I want to say publicly, I would love to interview you in the podcast.
Oh,
That's
yes.
coming next for us. I hope so. I would love to. The name of the podcast is Playing It Safe. And in the podcast, I am trying to capture people's experiences with fear and anxiety day to day. I mean, like a mother that is afraid of his kid being shot at the school, MD, a doctor that has to perform a surgery and maybe get anxious about the surgery not going well, firefighter that gets on a call. And as I capture those experiences, I interview experts like yourself on acceptance and commitment skills, of course, and we share how we can navigate through those moments. So that has been my project I think from last year, and I have to say that it's fun to do it, and it will be fun when I have you in the podcast, Rikke.
Thank you so much. And so people,
Of
if
course.
you, so I want you, so people who are watching this right now or who are watching the replay, please make sure to put your love in the comments so that, and again, Patricia is graciously offering your time, your wisdom for all of us. And so thank you so much for teaching us and for being here with me and for your kind and compassionate approach to this. It was really, really a very humbling and very inspiring experience. And so people go check out Patricia's website, thisisdrc.com, and make sure to also listen to the podcast and check out all of your books. I'm guessing you can see all of that on your website. So Dr. Zurita, thank you so much for being here. Everybody send the love for Patricia in the comments, and we thank you and wish you a beautiful day, and take care, everybody. Bye.